What if the richest person in the room is also the most broke? Not broke like an empty wallet, broke like an empty soul staring at a mortgage statement at 3 a.m, wondering where the last decade went. Broke like a man who drives a car that costs more than his parents' house but cannot remember the last time he felt financially safe. That is the trap. And the people caught in it are not the ones you would expect. They are the doctors, the lawyers, the engineers, the high earners, the people everybody else looks at and thinks they made it. But here is the secret nobody's talking about. Making it and being free are two completely different things, and the system was designed deliberately and carefully to make sure you never figure out the difference. This is the story of a trap so elegant, so perfectly constructed, that the people inside it spend their whole lives defending it. They call it success. They call it the reward for hard work. They Instagram it. They park it in the driveway. They wear it on their wrist. But underneath all of that shine, underneath the granite countertops and the country club membership, there's a current of low-grade panic that never fully goes away. A feeling that the floor could open up at any moment. Because for most of them, it actually could. Welcome to the high-income poverty trap, the most sophisticated cage ever built. And today, we're going to trace it all the way back to where it started, who built it, and most importantly, how you walk out. Picture a doctor, not an abstract one, a real one. Let us call him Marcus. Marcus is 43 years old. He went to college for 4 years, then medical school for another 4, then a residency that lasted 5 years, during which he worked 80 to 100 hours a week for a salary that barely cleared $60,000 a year. He did not complain. He understood it was the price of admission. He told himself, just get through this, and then the real money starts. And the real money did start. Marcus is now a hospitalist in a mid-sized American city. He earns $320,000 a year. By any measure, that is a remarkable income. It puts him in roughly the top 2% of all earners in the country. His friends from high school think he is wealthy beyond imagination. His relatives assume he has no financial worries. And Marcus himself, in his quieter moments, wonders why he feels like he is always one bad month away from disaster. Here is what Marcus's financial life actually looks like. He graduated medical school with $240,000 in student loan debt. Interest ran during residency, so by the time he started earning real money, that balance had grown to just over $300,000. His monthly loan payment, on an aggressive repayment schedule, is $2,400. He bought a house because, at his income level, renting felt embarrassing. The mortgage on the 4-bedroom home in a neighborhood befitting a doctor is $3,800 per month. He leases 2 cars. The combined payment is $1,100 per month. His children are in private school because the public schools in the neighborhood near the hospital are not good, and moving somewhere with better public schools would mean an even bigger mortgage. Private school tuition for 2 kids runs $2,800 per month. We have not yet mentioned health insurance, malpractice insurance, disability insurance, food, utilities, or the slow bleed of a social life that requires expensive restaurants and vacations because his colleagues all live the same way, and downgrading would feel like announcing defeat. When you add it all together, Marcus is spending somewhere between $15,000 and $17,000 a month before he saves a single dollar. After taxes, a $320,000 salary in a moderate tax state nets roughly $18,000 a month. That leaves Marcus with maybe $1,000 to $3,000 per month of actual breathing room. In a bad month, when the car needs something, or a kid gets sick, or a home repair hits, that number goes negative. Marcus is not irresponsible. Marcus is not stupid. Marcus is one of the most rigorously trained human beings in his zip code. And Marcus is effectively living paycheck to paycheck. That is not a personal failure. That is a designed outcome. And to understand who designed it and why, we have to go back, way back, to a time when the blueprint for Marcus's life was being drawn up by men who were never going to live it themselves. The year is 1932. America is in the gutter. The stock market has lost almost 90% of its value from its 1929 peak. Unemployment is hovering near 25%. Banks are failing by the hundreds. Men who considered themselves solidly middle class in 1928 are standing in bread lines in 1932. The whole national psychology around money has shifted. Survival is the goal. Accumulation is a memory. Spending is something you do only when you absolutely must. This is a problem. Not for ordinary people who are just trying to eat. This is a problem for the people who make money when other people spend it. The manufacturers, the retailers, the banks. The entire commercial infrastructure of a capitalist economy runs on consumption. And when people stop consuming out of fear, the machine grinds to a halt. The Great Depression was not just a financial crisis. It was a consumption crisis. People had learned, in the most brutal way possible, that you could be wiped out overnight, and that lesson made them careful. Permanently, stubbornly, multi-generationally careful. The man who ran the American economy understood this, and they understood that when the Depression eventually ended, which it would, they would face a new problem. They would face a population that had learned to be afraid, a population that saved, a population that repaired things instead of replacing them, that wore clothes until they wore out, that viewed debt as a moral failure and thrift as a virtue. That population was, from a pure economic growth standpoint, a nightmare, so a new idea began to take shape. Not in a single boardroom, not in a single conversation, but across industry groups and advertising agencies and chambers of commerce and eventually government economic policy committees. The idea was this: America needed to be retrained. The saving instinct, the fear instinct, the depression mentality, it had to be replaced. And it had to be replaced with something more productive for the economy. It had to be replaced with desire. The 1950s is where the real engineering happened. The war was over. American manufacturing, which had been running at full wartime capacity, needed a new outlet. Soldiers came home and needed houses, cars, appliances, furniture, televisions. The suburbs exploded outward from every major city like rings on a pond after a stone is dropped. Levittown in New York, Park Forest outside Chicago, Lakewood near Los Angeles. These were not just housing developments. They were prototypes. They were the physical manifestation of a new ideology about what a successful American life was supposed to look like. Edward Bernays, the father of modern public relations and the nephew of Sigmund Freud, had already spent decades figuring out how to connect products to identity. He was the man who got women to smoke cigarettes in the 1920s by rebranding them as torches of freedom, symbols of liberation. He understood deeply and cynically that people do not buy products. They buy versions of themselves. They buy the story of who they are or who they want to be. And by the 1950s, an entire industry had absorbed this lesson and was running with it at full speed. Advertising on the new medium of television reached into every living room in America with a single, repeated, relentlessly hammered message. This is what success looks like. A house in the suburbs. A car in the garage. A washer and a dryer. A television set. A refrigerator full of food. A lawn. A barbecue grill. A certain kind of normal that carried within it an unspoken demand. You must achieve this, and then you must upgrade it, and then you must upgrade it again, or you have failed. Vance Packard wrote about this in his 1957 book, The Hidden Persuaders. He described a system of psychological manipulation so sophisticated, so deeply embedded in the culture, that most people could not see it operating on them. The advertisers were not selling products. They were selling anxiety and then selling the cure. They made you feel the absence of the thing before they offered you the thing. They made you feel the absence of status, of belonging, of adequacy. And then they told you what to buy to feel it again for a while, until the next campaign started. But here is the most important part of this history. The part that connects directly to Marcus standing in his 4-bedroom house at 3 a.m, feeling financially hollow. The 1950s machine did not just sell products to average people. It also manufactured a new hierarchy, a new ladder, a new set of visible markers that told the world exactly where you stood and exactly what you needed to acquire to climb one rung higher. And at the top of that ladder, they placed the professional class. The system did not stumble into its current form. It was built piece by piece. And every piece was designed with one purpose: to ensure that high income and financial security never actually coincide. The first piece is education debt. This one is almost elegant in its cruelty. The credentials required to access high income in America have become extraordinarily expensive. A medical degree costs, at many private institutions, somewhere between $200,000 and $350,000 in tuition alone, before living expenses during training. A law degree at a top school runs $150,000 to $200,000. An MBA from a brand-name program can add another $100,000 on top of a career that already required an expensive undergraduate degree. The debt is not an accident of underfunding. It is a structural feature. It ensures that the highest-earning professionals in the country begin their earning years already in a hole so deep that climbing out of it takes the better part of a decade, during which the lifestyle pressure is simultaneously being applied from every direction. The second piece is the lifestyle lock-in. This one operates through social infrastructure. High-earning professionals are not distributed randomly across geography. They cluster. Doctors live near other doctors. Lawyers socialize with other lawyers. Investment bankers compare notes with investment bankers. And within those clusters, a very specific consumption norm establishes itself and enforces itself with tremendous social pressure. The car you drive is noticed. The neighborhood you live in is a data point. The school your children attend is a status signal. Nobody sits you down and tells you the rules. You absorb them. You watch. You match. And then you overspend by 20 to 30% of your income, maintaining a lifestyle that your peer group has silently declared to be the minimum acceptable standard. The third piece is the tax structure. A doctor earning $300,000 as a W-2 employee, meaning a salaried hospital employee rather than a business owner, pays taxes in a way that is structurally punishing to wealth accumulation. Federal income tax at that level is north of 30%. State income tax, depending on location, adds another 5 to 13%. Payroll taxes apply to the lower portions of income. By the time you are done, a physician earning $300,000 might keep somewhere between $170,000 and $210,000 after federal and state taxes. That sounds like a lot. But remember the student loans. Remember the mortgage in the right zip code. Remember the private school. Remember the malpractice insurance that can run $15,000 to $30,000 per year depending on specialty. The math tightens fast. The fourth piece, and this one is the most insidious, is the retirement illusion. High earners are allowed to contribute to tax-advantaged retirement accounts. In theory, this is how they build wealth. In practice, the contribution limits are capped at levels that are meaningful for average earners, but genuinely inadequate for high earners trying to compress decades of delayed wealth building into a shortened working window. A doctor who starts earning serious money at 32 or 33 after training has roughly 30 years until traditional retirement age. The math of compound interest is brutally sensitive to starting age. Starting at 22 and starting at 32 are not similar. They are different universes, and the person who spent those 10 extra years in training racking up debt is expected to build retirement security using the same vehicles as someone who started a decade earlier. Now, layer on top of all of this the most powerful psychological mechanism in the trap, the fear of falling. The person who has built a life around a certain standard of living develops a specific and paralyzing terror around the loss of that standard. The mortgage, the school, the cars, the social membership, these are not just expenses. They are identity. They are the physical expression of years of sacrifice and delayed gratification. To give them up, to downsize, to step off the ladder feels like admitting that the sacrifice was not worth it. It feels like failure. It feels like becoming someone who did not make it. And that fear is the lock on the cage. It is what keeps the high earner running on the wheel even when some quieter part of them knows with complete certainty that the wheel is not going anywhere. The system did not create this fear accidentally. The advertising infrastructure, the social comparison mechanisms, the visible markers of status, all of it was designed and refined over decades to make that fear as sharp and as constant as possible. Because a doctor who is afraid of losing what they have is a doctor who will keep earning and keep spending and never ask the dangerous question, what am I actually doing this for? Here is the uncomfortable truth that sits at the center of all of this. The escape from the high-income poverty trap is not a financial strategy. It is a philosophical one. The numbers are actually the easy part. The hard part is the identity surgery required before the numbers can even be addressed. The first cut goes straight to the story. Every person caught in the trap has a story about what their life is supposed to look like, what kind of car a person of their status drives, what kind of neighborhood they are supposed to live in, what their children's education is supposed to cost. That story was not born inside them. It was installed. It was installed by culture, by advertising, by the behavior of their professional peer group, by the silent, continuous pressure of a system that profits when they spend. And the first move, the foundational move, is simply to see the story for what it is. Not truth, not necessity, story. This is not a call to asceticism. This is not a prescription to sell everything and move into a cabin. It is something more radical and more practical than that. It is the practice of distinguishing between what you actually want and what you have been conditioned to want. Those two things are almost never the same. The doctor who needs a luxury SUV has almost never examined that need. It is just there, like the furniture in a house they moved into fully furnished. Part of the escape is walking through the house, room by room, and asking about each piece. Did I choose this, or did someone choose it for me? Thomas Stanley and William Danko spent years researching this exact dynamic for their book, The Millionaire Next Door, published in 1996. Their finding was jarring and clarifying. The people who actually accumulate wealth in America are not the high earners with the visible markers of success. They are almost invisible. They drive used cars. They live in houses well below what their income could theoretically support. They do not signal status because they have freed themselves from the economy of status. Stanley and Danko called the high-income, high-spending professional class under-accumulators of wealth. They called the quiet, seemingly ordinary savers prodigious accumulators of wealth. And the difference between the two groups was not income. It was the willingness to decouple identity from spending. The practical steps that follow from this philosophical shift are significant. They include attacking debt with the same intensity used to attack a diagnosis, because debt is a disease of the financial body and it should be treated as such. They include building what some financial planners now call an FU fund, a pool of liquid savings large enough to give you genuine choices, the ability to say no to the bad contract, the difficult colleague, the exhausting shift schedule, because you do not desperately need the next paycheck. They include rethinking the geography of life, because the zip code you chose to match your peer group may be costing you $2,000 to $3,000 a month in mortgage premium that is funding status anxiety rather than security. They include the honest and difficult conversation about private school, about whether the education premium is real or perceived, about whether the decision is being made for the child or for the parent's social narrative. They also include, for those with any entrepreneurial tolerance, the deliberate construction of an entity structure. The doctor who incorporates, who runs income through a professional corporation or an LLC, accesses a different tax universe than the salaried employee. Business expenses become deductible. Retirement contribution limits expand dramatically through vehicles like a solo 401k or a defined benefit pension plan. The same income, structured differently, produces dramatically different after-tax wealth accumulation. The system is not neutral. It rewards those who understand its architecture and use it. The people who built the trap also left doors in it. They just did not put up signs. But all of that is downstream. All of the tactics and the structures and the account types are secondary to the primary question, which is this: what does freedom actually feel like to you, and are you building toward it or away from it? Marcus, our doctor from the beginning, did not walk into a bank and ask for a trap. He walked into a story that had been prepared for him long before he arrived. A story written in the 1950s, refined through decades of advertising and social engineering, enforced by the invisible peer pressure of a professional class that is, collectively, too proud and too exhausted to admit what is happening. He followed the path because the path looked like success and felt like duty and was presented as the only reasonable option for someone of his intelligence and his sacrifice. The trap is sophisticated because it does not look like a trap. It looks like reward. It looks like the payoff. It looks like the thing you were promised if you just worked hard enough and sacrificed enough and delayed enough gratification. And by the time you are inside it, inside a mortgage and a lease and a school and a loan payment, the cost of leaving feels greater than the cost of staying. That calculation is exactly what the designers of the system were counting on. The way out begins not with a spreadsheet. It begins with a question asked quietly, maybe at 3 in the morning, maybe staring at a bank statement that should feel like victory but somehow does not. The question is, who told me this is what I was supposed to want? And once you ask it, once you really sit with it and follow it back through the advertising and the social comparison and the cultural programming and the genuine sacrifice of your training years and the deferred life you were promised you would one day get to, something shifts. The cage becomes visible. And visible cages, unlike invisible ones, can be walked out of. Not all at once, not without cost, not without the discomfort of being misread by the peers whose approval you spent a decade earning, but they can be walked out of. And the people who do it, the doctors who buy the modest house and drive the paid-off car and retire a decade before their colleagues, they almost universally report the same thing. It was not the money that changed. It was the story. And once the story changed, the money followed. The high-income poverty trap is not a personal failure. It is a masterpiece of social architecture. The least you can do is know its name.